Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming is a vast expanse of rugged beauty. Pines and lakes dominate its landscape. It's a place where nature reigns. It's also where Carl Higdon's life took a turn in October 1974. Higdon, an experienced outdoorsman, embarked on a hunting trip. He ventured into the forest, eager to test his skills. Little did he know, he was about to have an encounter that would change his life. The events that unfolded would remain a mystery. The autumn air filled Higdon's lungs as he trekked through the undergrowth. The forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and bird calls, creating a symphony of nature that accompanied his every step. He carried his rifle, his senses alert for any sign of game. Every crack of a twig or flutter of wings made him pause, his eyes scanning the foliage for movement. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent. The light bathed the forest in a warm glow, casting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. It cast shadows through the trees, creating an almost magical atmosphere. The forest seemed to transform, taking on an ethereal quality as day turned to dusk. Higdon decided to call it a day and return to his campsite. He packed up his gear, the day's events replaying in his mind as he made his way back through the now dimly lit forest. As he made his way back, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the forest itself was watching him, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig amplifying his unease. He felt he was being watched. His heart began to race, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, lurking just beyond view. He paused, scanning his surroundings. The forest was quiet now, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The trees stood tall and silent, the underbrush undisturbed. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. He dismissed the feeling and continued on his way. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, a trick of the fading light and the solitude of the forest. His instincts, however, would soon prove to be accurate. The forest held secrets, and Higdon was about to uncover one of its most chilling mysteries. Just as Higdon rounded a bend in the path, a sight unlike anything he'd ever seen stopped him in his tracks. His heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Standing in the middle of the trail was a tall, humanoid figure. It was unlike any creature he had ever encountered. It was at least 8 feet tall and had smooth, hairless skin. The skin seemed to shimmer in the dappled forest light. Its arms were long, reaching almost to its knees. The fingers were elongated and seemed to twitch, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Higdon was paralyzed with fear. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he stood rooted to the spot. He couldn't believe his eyes. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this couldn't be real, yet there it was, right in front of him. The creature seemed to radiate an otherworldly presence. It was as if it didn't belong to this planet, and its very existence defied the laws of nature. It made no threatening moves. It simply stood there, observing Higdon with an almost curious demeanor. It just stared at Higdon with large black eyes that seemed to pierce his soul. The eyes were deep and endless. The encounter was as unsettling as it was inexplicable. Higdon knew that this moment would be etched into his memory forever, a mystery that he would never fully understand. Higdon stood frozen, caught between terror and disbelief. As he stared at the figure, he noticed a humming sound. It seemed to come from the creature itself. The humming grew louder, and Higdon felt a tingling sensation throughout his body. The last thing he remembered was a blinding light. It enveloped him completely. When Higdon regained consciousness, he was lying on his back. He was staring up at a star-filled sky. He was stunned and confused. The encounter with the entity had left him disoriented. The search begins. When Higdon didn't return from his hunting trip as scheduled, his family became worried. They contacted the authorities. A search and rescue operation was launched. Teams combed the wilderness of Medicine Bow National Forest, desperate to find any trace of the missing hunter. Days turned into nights as the search continued. Hope began to dwindle. The terrain and the lack of any leads made the search challenging. The mystery of Higdon's disappearance deepened. It baffled both authorities and the public alike. A glimmer of hope. 5 days after his disappearance, a group of hunters reported finding Higdon's truck. It was parked near the edge of a meadow. The discovery sent a surge of excitement through the search parties. It provided a much-needed break in the case. The hunters who found the truck reported seeing strange lights in the sky the night before. This fueled speculation about the nature of Higdon's disappearance. Theories ranged from alien abduction to encounters with unknown creatures. However, the authorities remained skeptical. Miles from nowhere. Shortly after the discovery of his truck, Higdon was found wandering in a daze. He seemed to be in a state of shock, his eyes vacant and his steps unsteady. It was as if he had been transported to another world and back. He was miles away from where he had vanished, in a place he had no recollection of ever being. The wilderness around him only added to the mystery of his reappearance. He was confused and disoriented, unable to piece together the events that had led him there. His mind was a blank slate, wiped clean. He had no memory of what had happened to him during the missing days. It was as if time itself had swallowed him whole, leaving no trace of his experiences. His rifle and the carcass of a deer he'd shot were gone. The truck, found abandoned, was the only clue to his whereabouts during those lost days. His clothes were torn, and he had strange marks on his body. They resembled burn marks, as if he had been exposed to some intense heat or energy. His story, when he was finally able to tell it, was even more bizarre. He spoke of strange occurrences and inexplicable events that defied logic. He claimed he had encountered a creature in a blinding light before blacking out. His story strained credulity, sounding more like a science fiction tale than reality. It left investigators with more questions than answers. The mystery of what happened to Higdon in those missing days remains unsolved. A puzzle with pieces that refuse to fit together. Unanswered questions. Despite extensive investigations, the details of Carl Higdon's disappearance remain a mystery. His description of encountering a humanoid entity and experiencing a loss of time is difficult to explain. Skeptics point to the lack of physical evidence, suggesting psychological factors might have been at play. However, believers in the paranormal view Higdon's case as credible evidence of extraterrestrial encounters. They point to the marks on his body and his compelling testimony. The lack of a definitive explanation has only added to the intrigue. An enduring enigma. The case of Carl Higdon's disappearance continues to fascinate and perplex. It serves as a reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows of our world. Whether a product of extraterrestrial encounters, unexplained phenomena, or simply the human mind pushed to its limits, the story remains unsolved. Carl Higdon eventually returned to his normal life. He carried the weight of his experience with him. His story stands as a testament to the unknown. It leaves us questioning the limits of our understanding and the true nature of our universe.